I just want to pick up on 5 economic trends in the world. And the reason for this is that this is genuinely how it comes to life. But of course, this may be where they are reflecting. This is what somebody like me, who is a practicing economist, is looking at. And also, these are the things that are affecting the jobs that they will subsequently go on, whether it might be in economics or business or engineering or the professional services or apprenticeships, etc. So the first one here that I wanted to pick up on is rapid digitalization. And like when I think back, I published the first textbook with 2 other authors back in 2013. And back then, the digital resources were slides, they were multiple choice questions, and we had individual questions as well that where you could pull up the slides, and then as you advance through the slides, the answers were being put forward. Now, then by the time I got to the second version, at this point, we were now putting QR codes into books. We were now directing people towards links and links on YouTube. We wouldn't have even thought of Netflix at the time. So, and also by then, when we were talking about technology, now at this, COVID hadn't happened by the time we were publishing in 2019. So there was far less focus on, for example, working from home. I started doing Facebook Lives. Remember those? I started doing Facebook Lives when I was doing the first version of Positive Economics webinars. Then after that, then we realized that people weren't on Facebook necessarily. So then we went on and I started doing actual webinars using Zoom and GoToWebinar. Then, of course, COVID happened. We all know what happened then. And then there was a massive increase in the ability for people to study from home and so on like that. But at that point on, people, as COVID wore off, and as people got to grips with the early part of the project the first time and so on like that, then the hunger for staying on long form, it started to wear off. That's why I don't do, and that's why I stopped doing the Positive Economics webinars on a monthly basis. I was doing those all the time, as you know, and there's a range of those still up on YouTube, and some of them we've actually linked to in the new book as well. So where are we at now? Well, now it's Kahoot. Stephen designed a range of Kahoots. Now it is, like I say, economic documentaries on TikTok and Instagram. Now it is the case where you've got the solutions to the questions. They never get out of fashion. Now, as I will show you soon, is that some organizations now are producing podcasts. So the way in which digitalization is happening in the way we learn, of course, even just in my own experience of writing textbooks, has certainly changed. While all that's very interesting, the thing is, well, where is this going? So what I wanted to particularly show you here is that I wanted to pick up on, this particular point here, which is, I got this from backlinko.com. And this was a survey that was conducted on, like, what problems are businesses facing today with digital transformation? Because these are the problems that your students will fundamentally be seeking to change. And this is where money is being spent today on workforces and various different elements of various spending today to make sure and solve these. So number one is the complexity of current environment and siloed mindset behaviors. Now you might say, okay, Susan, that's very interesting and all, like, but what has this got to do with me? This, if you think about how the exam is planned now, it is to prevent that siloed thinking of, if I learn national income, well then, right, that's great. I know I'll be able to face that topic and away we go. But as Stephen showed you in that sample question tonight, it's being mixed and matched. Even if you think about the 5 strands, the spec is designed to help the teenager to think differently and think laterally across the portfolio of topics that they need to think about. And that's transferring right in to the workplace today. So that is where the exam is at, and that's where it's going. So helping the teenager to think critically across the board. Even the project looks at learning objectives across the book, or across the curriculum. The second one here is gaps in technical talent, high and unforeseen costs. Well, okay, we'll go past this one. The creation of a culture of continuous learning, workforce upskilling or reskilling. When we look at the statistics of the CAO, and it's something that I look at all the time, and when I look at the particularly 21, 22, less so 23, when I look at the strategy of the government in general, why is it that the strategy of education is moving towards more project learning? Why is it now that it's focusing more on critical thinking, etc.? It's because, of course, that is the demands of industry, but it is the idea of the people today are living longer, and if they're living longer, well, then they're going to likely have to work longer, and as a result of that, and the way in which careers are changing, well, then people need to upskill and reskill as they go. So that focus on lifelong learning is something that we're all looking at anyway. But the ability to think critically, the ability to not just consume information, but to analyze it and critique it, is at the source of what the project is all about. Even when I think about how the spec changed in 2019, like I was only talking to the central bank about this at the time. At the time, the big change, one of the big changes that happened is students no longer needed to learn about the economists. They needed to no longer learn off stuff about Jean-Baptiste Say and Adam Smith, etc. And instead, they introduced a learning objective like to critically analyze the effectiveness of banking regulation. That is in chapter 15. That's a learning objective. And I remember at the time thinking, how do we write about this? And Stephen and I spoke about that as well. And now, obviously, we've done it and it's in the book and away we go. But that is where the student is being expected to come to the table with. And as Stephen says, they're 17. How are they supposed to critically analyze and critique the effectiveness of banking regulation? Well, the answer is by looking back and seeing when it worked versus when it didn't. And that one was a tough chapter to really bring to life because, of course, they don't have an awful lot of experience there with it. But the point I'm making here is that this trend of rapid digitalization, while it might be thinking that that is just at the preserve of technology companies, that is at the core of the thinking about how various different elements of the exam and otherwise are working. Now, the next one is shifting global supply chains. Well, if there's one story that no matter what day I talk about it, it's different, it's this one, of course, and that is the tariffs. Everyone's talking about the tariffs since the inauguration. People have been talking, well, that's because they've been implemented. Before that, it's been, well, what if? What if Trump implements tariffs on cars coming out of China, and then what does that mean for builder trades? How is this going to impact on Europe if it's going to be implemented in Europe? And then would that mean companies like the marginal efficiency of capital video, in that case, would a company like that turning over €500 million in Monaghan have to make different decisions accordingly? So tariffs are, look, it's so high on the agenda at the moment in conversation, but how will this filter into the way in which not just tariffs and international trade and balance of payments and how all that's affected, but actually if you think about the source of the political source of where this is actually coming from, it's to do with immigration. It's to do with negotiation of trade treaties. It is questioning things like the NAFTA trade agreement that was created decades ago at this point. And so when you look at how the European Union is looking at retaliating if this comes to pass in Europe, it's the big bazooka. It's limiting export. It is implementing particularly I'm just trying to keep my language non-technical, but it is about implementing trade controls on services, particularly because that is where it's not a good. While we might have a goods deficit with the US, we certainly have a services surplus. Then moving on to the third one, the emphasis on sustainability. Now, I wanted to show you this one. Look at the future of jobs. Okay, this is from the World Economic Forum. I got this report. It was out on the 9th of January. Okay, so only a couple of weeks ago. And I'm just going to scroll down here to show you where the fastest growing jobs by 2030, right? So this isn't by 2050, by 2030 are coming from. And you can see here big data specialists, fintech engineers, etc. But I'm just going to bring it down here to number 12, because in all of the work I do with teenagers, I often think they don't see the focus on sustainability literacy. But we certainly had to do that in the book. Chapter 3 is all about sustainability. It's about economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, social sustainability, the role of NGOs, the role of satisficing when it comes to entrepreneurship and that factor of production. There is so many ways when we get into the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 ones from the United Nations. Sustainability is all over the economic syllabus. It's all over it. And in my opinion, sustainability literacy is going to distinguish the people of the workers, let's say, of tomorrow. But also, this is where there are really fast growing jobs coming from. And again, how do we then bring this back to why this is relevant for a student studying economics today? Is because it is at the core of decision making in business. And when it comes to foreign direct investment, like, let's go back up here, big data. Now, of course, if you were to look into the economics of big data, the data centers in Ireland, the big question here is how sustainable they are because of the energy consumption. But a third of our energy in Ireland is generated by wind. Now, if as a country, economically, we were to invest more in generating clean energy to power big data, now think about how that changes the globalization of the foreign direct investment strategy for Ireland. Now, the foreign direct investment strategy for Ireland is in the core of chapter 17. I read it twice as we were writing that particular chapter. So the reason that I'm bringing up the emphasis on sustainability is it's in the curriculum, it's in the exam, it's in the workplace, it's in the country's economic strategy, and it's also now in far more of national parlance. And it's also, like I say, in the World Economic Forum, you can see there as well. Now, this one, the growing population in Ireland, this one is something that came up last week. No, the week before, 29th of January. This was published by the CSO, and this is going to affect the number of people you teach. So this is the regional population projections between 2023 and 2042. And there is one number that really jumps out at me, and that is Ireland's population is set to increase to between 5.77 million and 6.4 million by 2042. Now, the question is, where are they going to go to school? Where are they going to live? What services are they going to be in, etc. And there's two reasons the population are increasing in Ireland. Number one is, of course, it is a great place to live. It's a great place to work when you look at an environment of national wages and so on. Now, you might say, well, it's a great place to live if you can find a house to live in. Notwithstanding that, economically, Ireland, number one, is doing really well economically, and secondly, is doing much better than the average in Europe. In the last quarter, Europe, the Eurozone did not grow, the GDP did not grow at all. Ireland, of course, is a complete outlier in that regard. But that's not all. Due to climate change, the likelihood is that the demographic drive would move from Central Europe. When I say central, I mean by latitude, not longitude. So as temperatures would increase, is that people would move further north. And of course, there we are again. We are the only country in Europe to be where our population is today lower than it was 200 years ago. And the reason for that, of course, is what happened 180 years ago, which is the famine. So it is likely, that's when we had 8 million people in Ireland. So as you can see, the population is increasing and growing. Now, why is this of interest to a student? Is because this drives a range of things: government planning, the sovereign wealth fund that the government is creating, and putting some of the corporation tax that's coming in. But it's also, like I say, how services are going to need to change and react to this. And another number that jumps out at me here is where these people are going to go. It's not Dublin or Cork. It's not the cities. It's the Mid-East region. That's where particularly they see a particular increase in growth. Kildare, Louth, Meath and Wicklow. And if you're joining us from there tonight, that's where they particularly see where an awful lot of the drive is going to be. One other thing, because we're all heading this direction, the number of people aged 65 years and over is set to meet 1 million nationally by 2030. In 5 years, in just 5 years, the likelihood is over 1 million people will be over 65 in the country. Now, how does the government invest accordingly for that? And what do the economists of tomorrow need to think about in order to prepare for that? So this is a really big trend, certainly, that's changing in Ireland. And any of these things that I'm bringing up to you are likely, of course, to be those macroeconomic themes that may appear as the paper is being prepared in time to come. And then the last one that I wanted to bring up here are changing skills needed in the workplace. Yep, for sure, of course, AI is the name of the game. And I see it all the time in the work that I'm doing. And look, it's a really big challenge. It's a really, really big challenge in employment, in education. Of course, you can generate case studies and all sorts in seconds with them. But of course, the challenge is that on the other side, that can happen too. I'm going to bring you back to the Future of Jobs report, and particularly when you look at the jobs that are in decline, that will just highlight to you where the skills of tomorrow are needed, but also where they're being reallocated away from.